Good evening, everyone. This is the October 8th, 2019 Parks, Recreation, Human Services, and Public Safety Committee meeting. This is actually the first meeting we're in City Council chambers for this committee, so that's pretty exciting. And we're also live streamed on YouTube as well. And so I'm glad we have Thomas in our IT department to help us out with that, and it's very exciting that we're going to be able to do outreach to our community in this way. So first up, we have public comment, and the first public comment I have is Jason Clark. If you could step up to the podium, and then we have Amanda Santo after that.
How's everybody doing?
Doing well, Jason.
Great.
So,
Awesome.
really
Spectacular.
quick, being the first person, it's always good to just ask a question. The meeting, I'm assuming, is around some of the issues that are happening in the community currently, right?
That would be one of the items, yes.
So one of the things that I think specifically as far as like the public safety piece is, just kind of addressing that. In 2016, I was in the same room when there was a similar issue in Federal Way. Had kind of seen some of the community response to the issues that were happening. I was one of the leaders at that point in time in Federal Way who was tasked with doing some community outreach to be able to bring together some leaders to address some of those issues. And since I think directly investing in the communities that are most marginalized or impacted by issues of violence or, criminal misbehavior in Federal Way, have been able to participate in, the development of several community organizations and then approaches focusing on leadership, some of the gaps in services that we're seeing with the populations that are not just victims, but, committing crimes. And the one thing that I would say about this whole process is to be able to really address the issue, I think that you have to lean into the community and understand people who have overcome some of those issues or have contributed to that issue in the past. Just as LGBTQ organizations lean into, their community's leaders to be able to support their initiatives, or the Wounded Warrior Project supports, veterans and being able to advance issues in specific communities. I think when you think of issues of crime and violence in Federal Way, one of the things that I would like to advocate for and see more of is championing some of the leaders within the Federal Way community who have overcome adversity and some of the things that our community is facing now. Since 2016, I've been able to support several different initiatives. One of the most recent one is called Northwest Credible Messenger. Just through a strategic impact in the work that we've been able to do in Federal Way, we've seen a significant decrease in referrals to the juvenile justice system from school and police-based sources. And what we'd really like to be able to see and do is to create some sort of community outreach forum that starts to train more community leaders on just the different skills within cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, and really understanding those populations to be able to develop some sort of leadership trajectory and support that supports the young people and the adults that are facing, issues that end them up in, emergency rooms or jails or prisons, ostracized from schools. So, time's up. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it. Next up, we have Amanda Santo.
Good evening, council members. My name is Amanda Santo. I'm representing Multi-Service Center. I'm the Director of Operations and Affordable Housing Development. In order to build a future without poverty, MSC works to create pathways to help, hope, and dignity for our neighbors in need. And one of those critical pathways is affordable housing. That is why MSC is dedicated to preserving and developing affordable housing in the communities that we serve. MSC currently owns and operates over 600 units of affordable housing throughout King and Pierce County. 180 of those units actually are right here in the city of Federal Way. All are dedicated to low and moderate income households, and half of them are dedicated to seniors and veterans. We We also hear a lot from our stakeholders, our community members, our funders, our customers that we serve, that through our community needs assessment, that housing, affordable housing, and homelessness continue to be the top 3 issues that we see facing our community, both in South King County and the city of Federal Way. So because of this, we believe that all people should live in safe, healthy, and affordable housing, which is why we're encouraging the city to pass a resolution to support House Bill 1406, which will be later in the agenda discussion today, to support local investment in affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Any more public comment? Any more pink sheets? No? Okay. So next up, we have committee business, and first, what we typically do for committee business also is we have our committee members answer questions or make statements first, and then other council members as well following that. So I think Mark mentioned that last night in land use, so that's typically how the process is run. So we have the approval of the September 10th, 2019 minutes. Do I have a motion?
I motion that we accept the minutes as written.
I'll second that motion.
All right. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have the City Hall front door replacement contract award, and we have Jason Gerwen here to present on that item.
Good evening, Chair Johnson and other council members. As you mentioned, I'm here to talk about the City Hall front door replacement. The policy question would be, should the council award a contract in the amount of $24,954.60 to HTR Glass Construction to replace the main entry doors and the ADA accessible openers. And so kind of 2 options to consider: approve that and move that forward to enter in that contract, or do not allow us to award that contract and provide staff direction. I provided a memo with kind of the details on those front doors. Is there any questions or concerns with the replacement?
Committee, any questions? No questions? Straightforward, yes. So just to clarify as well, this is already funding that has been just for this project.
Yes,
It's already been
this
decided.
budget was allocated in the spring budget adjustment, and so it's just with the summer season, getting everything done and accomplished took us a little longer than we had expected, so that's why we're just now getting to do the work or award the contract.
Thank you.
I will ask.
Councilmember Moore.
When do you expect this to be completed, this project? What do you see the timeline as?
Timeline is, you're probably 8 weeks for materials, and they're going to be custom-made doors. We are changing the existing doors a little bit. Right now, they're 10-foot high doors, and that's part of the reason they failed. You know, we're controlled by proxy ID badges, and so it has a mag lock, and so when it's closed, people can pull on the door, and it stresses those frames. So we've shrunk those, put in an extra mullion in the middle to strengthen that aluminum frame. New ADA opener because, you know, it's just failing to close all the way. And so, you know, you've got over 20 years on these doors, the most used doors in the city, and they've just worn out.
Councilmember Copain.
How tall will the new doors be?
New doors will be 7 feet tall.
7 feet, okay, thank you.
Yeah, I don't think Shaq's coming through the door, so I think we're okay.
I think we'll be all right.
Okay. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
So next on the agenda, we have a monthly report on the PAC operations.
We did need a motion.
Oh, so sorry. So, committee, do I have a motion?
Yeah, I'll move to forward the contract award to HTR Glass and Construction to the October 15th, 2019 consent agenda for approval.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
So next we have monthly report on PAC operations. We have Brian Hoffman and Autumn Gressett here. Thank you for being here.
Good evening, Chair Johnson and other committee members. As we do monthly, we have provided a report for you guys that was sent out ahead of time for review. Last month in September, we had 11 total days utilized in the facility in comparison to 14 days in September 2018. Some of those rentals and usage dates were Federal Way Youth Symphony is back rehearsing in our theater on Wednesdays, as well as we had an evening with Dory Monson, Broadway's Next Hit musical, and then the Elite Productions bodybuilding competition. We also hosted the Greater Federal Way Chamber Luncheon, the Performing Arts and Events Center Educator Night, and Federal Way Economic Development Luncheon and Meetings. In addition, some of the information that we provided in follow-up to our presentation in front of council last month is where the Performing Arts and Events Center is year-to-date through July 31st, as well as projections from August 1st through December 31st to show you a total subsidy amount with projections. This is something that we'll continue to do as we roll month by month to give you guys a better understanding of how the PAC is operating and how that affects the city budget. Is there any questions?
Committee, any questions? Councilmember Copan.
Yeah. This is probably for Brian.
Okay.
Brian, I just wanted to follow up on our conversation last week about hiring someone to pursue the naming rights for the building.
Yeah, we're still in that process of, looking at those. Obviously, at the end of the day, budget is a biggest concern, so we're still looking and working with our corporate partnerships in regards to that.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
So one question I have, with the last 3 shows in September, they came a bit under the max that we can have there in the PAC. What is the plan going forward in terms of marketing and promoting our scheduled performances?
In regards to 2 of these, just to note on the 3 shows that happened within the theater, 2 of them are rentals. So every rental that happens in the facility, the primary marketing happens within that promoter. So our one show, I think Brian can speak to a little bit as far as Broadway's Next Hit musical and what the marketing plan is moving forward.
Yeah, as Autumn had mentioned, the shows that we have reported, September 13th, September 28th, those were rentals. It's the responsibility of the user group to provide 100% of the advertising dollars for those events. We supplement that with our website, utilizing our Facebook, Instagram, those types of things. With Broadway's Next Hit musical, we have a budget that we look at for every event, and moving forward, those are just things that we continue to analyze on where those advertising dollars can be best utilized to get the biggest bang for our buck.
And one thing that we'll be discussing with council and committee members at FedRAC, and as we move forward with this fall budget adjustment, is essential marketing plans moving forward over the next year to 2 years for the venue as a whole. So you'll see more of that over the coming weeks.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Honda?
Thank you. There is a performance that was canceled in September, Shenandoah. Can you tell us why that was canceled and how you informed people who had purchased tickets?
So yes, that was canceled just basically due to lack of ticket sales, and we informed those 64 ticket purchasers via email and or called them.
Was it do you know why there were such low ticket sales? When you booked them, I'm sure you anticipated more sales.
Yeah, we did. We would have hoped that it would have generated more ticket sales, but at the end of the day, we have to look at, is it better to cancel the show than to go on and increase our deficit to the PAC, or just cancel the show? And after discussions with the management and internally, we decided to cancel it. Some of the individuals that we notified, unfortunately, it went into their spam account. So there was 4 people that still showed up. They responded to me directly that evening, and I responded to them within 15 minutes of them letting me know, and that we apologize for the confusion that they weren't notified or that it did not go into their spam account. But all ticket purchasers, the 64 people that purchased tickets, were notified 2 weeks in advance, and some of them, it just went into their spam account.
Okay. And one other question. We've been talking about naming rights, and that's your responsibility as a general manager.
Yes, ma'am.
How many other buildings have you been able to get naming rights for, and is this more difficult than those were?
So Are you talking about
For you,
me
yeah.
personally?
Right, your experience.
My experience, I have not generated any naming rights for me personally on those facilities that I've managed. We have a team that does that, as we do here in Federal Way. It's a collaboration of myself and our corporate sales team and folks within Spectra Venue Management to get naming rights.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Moore.
Brian, a question for you, and that's, I imagine there's small businesses that come to you to asking if they could use space, correct?
Many.
Okay. What's the PAC's policy when it comes to, hey, we want to bring in snacks or some giveaways that's food? What's the policy of the PAC for that?
So that's kind of a hybrid question, so snacks or food or what have you, but
And of course, I'm not talking about meals. I'm not talking about,
yeah, so for
catering
an example,
food, but-
we have an event coming up next week. We have 10 or 20 vendors that will be having booths throughout the event. And we allow small pre-wrapped candies that they can have at their booth, for an example. So if you're the YMCA and you're part of this event, you can have a bowl of pre-wrapped candies. That's fine. But if it is an event where, say the symphony that wants to bring in, I'm just kind of spitballing, cookies or fried chicken or whatever the case may be, no, we don't allow that. Just because we don't know if that is made in their home or anything like that. And at the end of the day, that's taking revenue out of the PAC budget, your budget, that we have to abide by. So we can't allow every group to bring food in that's donated. We don't know where it comes from. And unfortunately, if there's a situation that somebody provides food that is not made well, and a lot of people that get sick attending to that, the headlines are going to say, PAC attendees get sick. That's a PR nightmare that none of us want. So we have to control those things that come into our facility. Now, if it's a bottle of water or those types of things, we actually, have those conversations with those event planners and can discuss them coming in prior to. But, we have policies and procedures that are in place to protect, the PAC, the City of Federal Way, and Spectra Venue Management. So it's no different that I can't go to McDonald's and bring my Starbucks in. I can't go to an Italian restaurant, and because I want Italian coffee, I can't bring my coffee in just because that's a coffee that I like and sit down and have dinner. Maybe that's not a good comparison or analogy, but that's what it is. And, at the end of the day, it's not gouging. It's not trying to make money or anything like that, but we have certain policies and procedures. That's why you hired us, is to have consistency. And every person that comes into the PAC and are eating at the PAC, those are things that we can control.
Okay. And is that a Spectra policy, or is that the City of Federal Way policy working through you guys?
It's both.
It's both, and it comes down to liability as well in regards to the licenses that they hold that cover essentially all four walls. The outside food and beverage is no different than liquor because they are the ones that hold it. The state sees it as if it's in those four walls, you're the responsible entity, regardless of if you gave somebody else permission. So it's a little bit of both, but comes down to liability.
Just to follow up on that, so if there was a business within the city, so like a Mama Stortini's, for example, that wanted to do an event within the PAC, are you saying that they couldn't provide food for that event?
Correct.
In the PAC? Okay. Just wanted to clarify that. Because a lot of community organizations that have done events at the PAC, Young Life, Communities in Schools, others, they want to hold these events, but because of expense, they can't at times because of the food expense, and they want to use other businesses. So you're saying that that's just not a possibility within the current policy?
Correct, it's not. That's the agreement that the city signed with Spectra Venue Management. And again, at the end of the day, you know, we want to have consistency and provide that great experience with folks that come in at the PAC.
And in regards to some of these nonprofit events, we've discussed this a little bit in the past, is each one is on a case-by-case basis as far as budget. I know Young Life has come up a few times in regards to year-over-year cost increases. And that's always something that at face value, if somebody looks at the PAC or from hearsay, hears that, but doesn't actually come and speak with them, may feel that that's the case, they can't afford it, there is no accommodations to be made. But I do truly believe if they had the conversation with Brian and were open and honest about what their needs are for their event, the PAC is very accommodating and can fit quite a few things in there. It just takes having the conversation versus just seeing it for face value.
Okay, thank you.
I do know that in conversations I've had with you, Brian, when we actually looked at an apples for apples comparison, all the costs rolled in, not just an item, the PAC was actually very competitive.
Correct.
So, yeah, I think that's, I know that in our conversations and what I've seen, I think the PAC is really working hard to accommodate the cost constraints some of these nonprofits have in order to have the events at the PAC. So thank you for that.
Councilman Ward, did you have anything else?
Yeah, you guys have done an amazing job with the PAC. I mean, the numbers show it, and I know that we're looking forward to continuing to seeing better results and good results as well. I think the only thing that's on my mind is if I am a small entity, and clearly we're not doing catering, and my entity, and if I wanted to bring, you know, let's say Chick-fil-A, I dare say that, but Chick-fil-A, you know, wants to donate cookies, you know, it's a business, you know, it's made in a very safe place, or something of that nature, whatever that example may be. I guess just, you know, I wish there was a way to work with that small entity and just bring that in. Because at the end of the day, you're going to get happy customers, maybe repeat businesses because of that good effort, you know. But I understand, Brian, when you talk about how, look, we have to make money. You're absolutely right. I understand that part. But I think those type of relationships and negotiations could be of value, I think, if that makes any sense. I'm not talking about making cookies at home, because clearly you're absolutely right. The PAC would be held liable if there's any sort of issues. So I understand that.
Yeah, and the situation you just described, yeah, we can have those conversations, you know, and if there's a dollar value, you know, are they giving them away as people leave? You know, every situation, every event is totally different, so it's not a one shoe fits all. Okay. So we always make accommodations. We always have those conversations with every event that we have. But again, you know, we just can't say that everybody can bring in any type of food, Starbucks, whatever the case may be, into our facility, because now we have no control. And that's the reality of it.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Autumn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So next on the agenda, we have the chief here for a couple items, the first of which is the Valley Narcotics Enforcement Team, U.S. Department of Justice, Drug Enforcement Administration, High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Task Force Agreements. Long title. Chief.
Good evening, Chairman Johnson, Deputy Mayor Honda, members of the council. The police department is seeking committee and council approval to continue our partnership with Department of Justice, DEA, Drug Enforcement, to participate in their regional task force, also known as the Valley Narcotics Enforcement Team. We have a detective that's assigned to the task force, and we've been a member since 2010. So with council and committee approval, we'd like to continue that. And what this contract will do is it will allow us to recoup our overtime expense up to $18,649 for the detective that's signed to the task force. So the policy question before you is our continued partnership on a regional DEA drug task force, and also to recoup our overtime expenditure.
Thank you, Chief. Committee, any questions? Chief, just to clarify, so this is funding that's already been allocated for police overtime that's just being reimbursed essentially by the Department of Justice for that work,
Correct. The detective that works overtime while during that assignment, it would come out of our PD budget, and they would reimburse us up to $18,000. Generally, it's been sufficient to cover all the overtime expenses by our detective.
Okay. Any other questions? Great, thank you. Committee, do I have a motion?
Yeah, I move to forward the proposed agreement to the October 15, 2019 council agenda for approval, council consent agenda for approval. Boy, that was tough.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have public safety report. So just to clarify, we asked the chief to do quarterly crime reports, and he started this process last, I think, January. And so we've had 2 crime reports so far. This is the 3rd one for this committee. We did ask for this committee that the focus be on the recent shootings within the city, as well as domestic violence. Councilmember Moore advocated for that as well. And so, Chief, just, thank you for being here. Thank you for pulling together a report on very short notice. So I really want to thank you for that, because that was just yesterday that you got asked to do this. So thank you again, and look forward to your presentation.
Been working really hard this morning to put all the numbers together. But I'm here to provide our regularly scheduled 3rd quarter public safety report. So overview of the presentation, I'm going to share with you our crime stats, NIBRD numbers, comparing 2018 to 2019 for the first 9 months of the year. And also one of our measurements is our response time by our patrol officers. I'll be sharing those with you. And I'll give you an update on our jail services, where we are with that, and then our crime prevention efforts. And then I'll be sharing with you what I typically don't share, but be sharing with you our gun violence statistics. And probably at that time, I will give you an update on the our most recent shootings. And then lastly, I think the committee also asked for a report on domestic violence, so I will be sharing some information with you on that as well. Okay, as you're familiar with our NIBRD reports, you've seen this before. A couple of things I wanted to share with you. These are preliminary numbers, meaning that not all of the data for the month of September has been entered into our system. So there's a little bit of lag time from our records unit. But I anticipate that it'll still be either 9% or maybe 8%. But overall, just looking at the macro number, we're continuing to see a downward trend in terms of overall crime. And I will get into specific crimes here in a minute. So since 2016, we had a kind of uptick in crime in 16, and for the past 3 years, we've been seeing a downward trend each year. Another thing I wanted to share with you as well is that it's very important when you look at these numbers that, as a general rule, you don't compare with other jurisdictions. FBI recommends that, so does WASPIC from the state. And the reason they do that is the way data is collected from agency to agency might differ. For example, in the Federal Way Police Department, if somebody wants to report a crime, we take reports on all crime. If you want to contact with an officer, we have enough resources to make sure that we have a contact with our citizen by an officer. We also take phone reports. Citizens can also come and file a report at the front desk. We also do online reporting, which is about 250 reports a month. Some jurisdictions don't provide those conveniences, so there could be potential less reporting. Some jurisdictions also have a $1,500 limit. So if there's a theft of less than $1,500, a police officer won't respond, won't be taking a report on that. So when you start comparing city to city, you got to be really careful, because not everybody's collecting data the same way. So the numbers that you're looking at, methodology in terms of collecting the data, we have not changed the way we collect data for the Federal Way Police Department. So for 3rd quarter of comparing 2018 to 2019, our total crimes reported for the first 9 months of this year is 5,852. The previous year was 6,465. That's the 9% reduction that you just looked at. And then far as our murder numbers, if you look at the last 5 years, typically our community experiences about 5 homicides or 5 murders a year in our community. And typically, about half of those generally are domestic violence related. So when 2016 year was a bad year for us, for our community. 17 wasn't so good either, but last year we had 1 murder, and it wasn't gun related, it was a child abuse case. And in terms of through September, we've had no murders in our community, but as you know, on October 6th, we experienced our first gun violence murder in our community. Aggravated assaults. These are felony assaults. I wanted to highlight that as well. We're also seeing a downward trend with aggravated assault. So last year, after 9 months, we had 174 assaults, and after third quarter, we're at 120. And when we get to domestic violence, you'll note that significant number of these aggravated assaults are domestic violence related. Robbery, last year we had 199 robberies through third quarter, and we're at 162. One thing I do want to point out about robberies is that these are not incident-driven, but they're victim-driven. So if you have a common type of robbery you might have is people might get together to buy or sell things on the internet. They contact it through the internet, whether it's OfferUp or what have you. If somebody pulls out a knife or threatens to use force or pulls out a gun and steals the item, let's say a cell phone, and there are 2 individuals there, they're victims, it counts as 2 robberies. So that's how NYBERGS counts robberies. It didn't make sense to me initially, so we actually had discussions at the state level, and their rationale is if you went to a shooting incident and there were 2 deceased persons, would you count that as 1 murder or 2 murders? Of course you would count that as 2 murders. So I just want you to know that when you see these numbers, they're not necessarily one incident. You could have 4 victims in 1 robbery. Auto theft, we've been trending downward for a number of years since 16, so you can see the downward trend, and we are probably hitting some of the lowest numbers we've seen in terms of auto theft numbers in our community. And this is one of those crimes that people say, hey, maybe all crime isn't reported, and that is true for every year and for every community, but auto theft is one of those true crimes that just about everyone reports, because there's civil liability for not reporting your car stolen. So last year, third quarter of 2018, we had 613 auto thefts. This year so far, 458. So we are seeing a downward trend. And I wanted to point out that your police department has 4 automatic license plate readers. And we use that technology quite a bit, and we're finding stolen vehicles, sometimes from other communities that are in our community. Sometimes we find vehicles early in the morning and somebody's sleeping in there, and we make arrests that way. Sometimes the vehicle's rolling. So we use that technology quite a bit, and that certainly has made an impact catching auto thieves and detecting other criminal activity as well. Commercial burglary, we've been seeing a slight increase on commercial burglaries in our community. Not necessarily all commercial burglaries are reported, but I would say significant number of commercial burglaries are all reported, unless it's a shed or a fenced area, something like that. A business might not report it, but generally speaking, this is one of those, again, kind of accurate crimes that you measure. So last year, we had 207 burglaries after 9 months, and this through the 9 months of this year, 228 commercial burglaries. Residential burglary, we've been seeing a downward trend. Last year, we had 399 total burglaries, And this year, we're going to be much lower. And our crime analyst told me just this afternoon, she said this is the lowest residential burglary numbers that historically we've seen in our community. So last year, after third quarter, we're at 299 residential burglaries. After third quarter of this year, 197. And it is very low, because 2000, about 10 years ago, probably we were at our peak in terms of residential burglaries. So we're seeing a significant drop. Okay, so response time, very important measurement for us. This is something I pay attention to as an administrator. And when you look at our third quarter number here, our overall response time, and that's our emergency call to all the way through priority 1, 2, 3, and 4. We average all of it. We're at 1742 for every call. If you look at the previous year, you can see that in 2016, 1932, 1939, 1856, we're seeing a drop of roughly a minute. So that's a good sign. And in terms of our emergency call for all calls, 5 minutes for our emergency calls. And I want to be, this number can be skewed a little bit when you look at emergency call, because sometimes it'll come out what we call a three-toner, meaning it's an emergency call, and while the officers are en route, sometimes the call classification changes. So sometimes, because if we have very few of these type of calls, emergency calls, one call like that where somebody cancels or gets delayed could significantly change the response time. But again, overall, last year, 1856, 1742, and our total calls for service through 9 months, we're at 52,051. So roughly, we're going to be at probably 75,000, 76,000 calls for service. So since 2015, we've been seeing overall a little bit of a downward trend in terms of 911 calls into our Valleycom Dispatch Center. Jail services. We have completed the contracts. We have about 6 contracts in place. We are now in the process of hiring. We've just hired our jail coordinator position today, and we're in the process of hiring 3 transport officers, and they will be coming on board towards the end of the year. And we are all geared to leave SCORE at January. So we will be pulling out our inmates at the probably the last week of December, and we'll be transporting them to our various jail facilities. But we are prepared to go, and so wanted to give you the latest update there. Field operations, we were not able to gather the third quarter numbers, but I will certainly provide that to you during the fourth quarter report in January. And crime analyst prevention, our efforts continue to reach out to our community, to partner, to collaborate. Just to give you an idea, obviously we do like our Coffee with a Cop events, National Night Out, block watch meetings, safety presentations, active shooting presentation. We're reaching out to our community in terms of community contact. You can see the numbers here by our team, 933 contacts. Public education presentation, we did 40 of those. Crime prevention meetings, 48. So we're staying busy doing our outreach with our community. Okay, so we're going to now talk about gun violence. So I'm going to share with you threats with a gun. Anytime a gun is pulled out and a threat's made against a person, we're going to look at shots fired with injury, shots fired with non-injury, and then combining those 3, and that's how we keep track of our total gun-related crimes. So when you look at our threats with a gun, in this category, we're doing much lower than the previous year through October. This isn't just through the quarter. We did it through October 6th. And we're at 8 last year. All of last year, we're at 16. So these are annual numbers and not quarterly. And in 2017, we had 26, and 2016, 23 threats with a gun calls. Shots fired, no injury. So this is where we've had somebody shoot their gun and nobody got hurt. So We are trending a little higher, obviously, than last year, so we're at 12 compared to 8 last year. In 17, we had 15 of these incidents and 13 in 2016. This is where somebody shoots at someone and actually causes injury. So in 2016, we had 16. 2017, we had 11. Last year, we had 15. And this year, we've had 11 incidents. So when you combine those three categories, the total threats and gunshots fired, we were at a total of 52 of those gun-related crimes in 2016. We had 52 in 2017. Last year, we had 40. And this year, through October 6, we've had 31 incidents. So we're trending lower, about 10%, a little more than 10% from last year. And one last category that people have asked in the past, so we keep track of drive-by shootings. And I want you to know that these drive-by shootings are embedded in the other three categories that I shared with you. But we categorize it separately. Not all jurisdictions keep track of drive-by shootings, but we keep track of it here in Federal Way. So in 2016, we had a total of 18, 18 the following year, 15 last year. This year, we're at a total of 11. So what I would tell you about gun violence is that we do quite a bit in terms of prevention and education. I really think that Federal Way community overall, I think we do a great job. What I mean by that is we tend, whether it's communities in schools, boys and girls, we tend, all of us, we attend a lot of these events. And it's amazing how many people come out to support these non-profit organizations. I also want to mention Federal Way Youth Action Team. Bottom line is, I think I don't know that every community is like this. If they are, they're very fortunate. But I live in this community, I work in this community, and I know that a lot of people care. So what I'm telling you is that we do a lot as a community in terms of prevention and education. So when we're struck with gun violence like we have, and frankly, it's concerning when it happens. And I can tell you that last 2 years, overall, it's been pretty quiet for us. Okay, we're a city of 100,000. And what makes Federal Way challenging in terms of policing is we are kind of the hub of the southwest King County. We have Highway 99 that comes through our city, I-5 through our city. We have a very efficient transit system, so it brings all kinds of people into our community. If people in our community in northeast Tacoma or Browns Point want to come and dine out, they're going to come to Federal Way. People south of us, 25,000 people or so that are in unincorporated King County that have a Federal Way address, they associate with our city, and people come. So it brings a lot of people together. So why do these incidents happen? Sometimes maybe in Federal Way, one, we're the 5th largest city in King County. We're the 9th largest city in the state of Washington. If people are out and they want to get something to eat, they want to go buy something at a convenience store, we are the hub. This is the city that they're going to come to those type of activities. So a lot of people come together. So that's what kind of makes our policing challenging. But when these types of incidents happen, what I could tell you is that the enforcement part has to come in. We're the protectors, and the citizens rely on us to conduct a thorough investigation, arrest the individuals that are responsible for the crime. And when these people are committing these type of crime, I would tell you that it's a very small number of people in our society. And the quickest way to prevent future gun violence is to hold them accountable by arresting them and prosecuting them. But I know that when there's gun violence, it creates tremendous amount of fear. And I've shared this with you before. The reality of an average person becoming a victim of gun violence is extremely low. Your average citizen who's not involved in illicit activity, living in a risky lifestyle, the chances of not involved in those, chances of being a victim of that type of crime, pretty low. But you're far more likely to get hurt or killed in a traffic accident. And we see a lot more of that in our community. But I know gun violence does create a lot of fear. It is a priority for us. What I can assure you is that we are actively working these cases, and when we have a significant update, I will brief all of you on that as well. Okay, so I'm going to then go on. I'm sure you're writing your questions down. So domestic violence. For this quarter, you asked me to present statistics on domestic violence and what type of support do we, provide to our citizens who are victims of domestic violence. And I talked about traffic accidents being, probably the biggest threat for our citizens. And I would also tell you that I know people are extremely concerned about strangers assaulting them or what have you, and that's what you see quite a bit, whether it's in the news, whether it's on social media. But by far, a lot of our citizens are more likely to be assaulted by their family member and also by people that they know, that they associate with. So I would tell you that when you look at these numbers, statistics say, based on lots of different research, maybe 30% of people are reporting domestic violence, and these crimes are occurring behind, behind walls. It's hard to really detect these type of crimes. So when you look at these numbers, they're certainly not true crime numbers. They're far much greater. So when you look at this, assault 1 being the worst type of assault, and then assault 2, assault 3, those are all felony assaults. So right there, that's 61 crimes. And in those 61 crimes, you had 20 children were present when those felony crimes occurred. And we only had 160 aggravated assaults, but you can look at these numbers right there. So, it's not quite the same ratio. You want to look at that because it was 9 months versus a year's worth. But 61 of these cases were felony, okay? And then assault 4th degree is a misdemeanor, 225 of those. And domestic violence, burglary, and variety of other crimes in 2018, a total of 591 cases. And as a police department, we completed 18,149 police reports in 2018. And then our law department, of course, the police department is also involved, but our law department strives to provide significant support to our crime victims. So one of the things that we do as a city is that we have a full-time DV prosecutor. So this particular prosecutor takes only DV cases. And one of the things that the DV prosecutor also does is we have a legal update as part of our annual training for all our officers. So we block out an hour or sometimes 2 hours just to provide DV training, how we can put cases together better to prosecute and so forth. So we have a DV prosecutor. We also have a domestic violence advocate, Kathy Williams. She's our DV advocate. Typically, it's triggered by police referral, police reports, but she will also help anyone that comes to our city for help on a domestic violence-related matters. She explains the legal process, accessing resources, whether it's housing, DSHS, safety planning, or obtaining a civil restraining order. She helps with that. And then communicating with the victims on, before pre-trial and after trial, and just providing that support. We also have a legal assistant. She provides backup to the advocate and also does clerical work. So I think we are, with the team that we have in place and the training that we provide to our staff, I think we're providing exceptional service to our citizens when they're, domestic violence victims. So really, that's the end of my quarterly presentation. I'd be willing to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Chief, and thanks for your thorough presentation. It's not easy after the action forcing events we had last week to come up and talk about and deliver a crime report in light of those events, and so I really appreciate you taking the time to do that, not only for our committee, but for the entire community. Committee, any questions to start with? I know I have a few, but start with the committee. Okay, so one of the things that I've been hearing in the community is around police presence and the need for more police officers. I just had a couple questions around that, because I know that currently we have 4 unfilled police officer positions, correct, within our department?
That's correct. 4 vacant positions, and on the 18th, we'll be hiring, in fact, that week, we'll be hiring 3 more entry-level police officers.
Okay, so we do have more officers coming. And we did last year have an event at Federal Way High School where we did outreach around police officer positions. We had over 120 people show up to that event. I don't know how many actually were qualified to be officers, but we had a good turnout for that event. And so the outreach is there. We do have officers that are going to be hired. My question is around prevention, because we know that this has kind of cast a light on something that I think we all can agree on, which is access to guns, especially for youth, is a huge issue. And it's something that today I was at Federal Way High School and a youth told me that access to guns is as easy as access to gum for youth in today's society. And so can you speak at all to that around crime prevention, and what are we doing as a police department, or what can we do around that aspect? So not necessarily what we can do after the incident has occurred, but before incidents are occurring, especially within our youth population.
Yeah, one of the message I want to send out to our citizens is that if you have a firearm, it's got to be locked up. It's either on your person, it can't be in your purse, it can't be loosely in a car, it's got to be either on your person or it's got to be locked up. If we could just all adhere to that rule, we could prevent a lot of tragedies, just not in our community, but just as a country. Because we do have guns in our society. And I would tell you what, last 3 weeks ago or so, we had a 17-year-old young man take a gun in his home and commit suicide. Now that's never going to make the news, never going to make the headline, but that's gun violence. We also have accidental shootings that happen in our community. That's not going to grab the headline, but people have accidentally shot themselves and so forth. So what I would tell you is that if you're going to get a firearm, there's a training component and it's got to be locked up. So that's rule number one. I don't know that in this society that you're going to prevent all gun violence. When you look at what type of shooting are we talking about? If you're talking about an active shooter, mass killing situation, I could tell you right now that it doesn't matter what community that you live in, whether it's affluent, low income, it does not matter. So if people think that if I live in this community, I will avoid active shooting, mass shooting, I can tell you throughout our country, we have about 300 what we classify as mass shootings. When I talk about mass shootings, defining that as 4 or more people getting shot in a single incident is defined as a mass shooting. So we have over 300 incidents. So statistically, we're going to continue to have these incidents. And as a country, I don't think we're going to be able to avoid gun violence, but we can mitigate it. And I was alluding to it earlier. We're here as protectors, we're the safety net. When something like gun violence occurs, the citizen expectation is that we investigate it, hold people accountable. But if you're just relying on the police, we're never going to get to the solution, because we got to have strong families, we got to support our schools, and that's what I'm most proud about living in this community and being the police chief is there's so many caring people, and we're all working hard. So when tragedy like this occurs, absolutely concerning, but we have a role to play as a police department, as a leader to lead our community in terms of law enforcement. But there's no easy answers, because if there was an easy answer, every community in America would just, take that formula, we'd be done. But I think there's new legislation requiring, guns to be locked up. Over time, that education piece, prevention piece will help. And clearly, people who commit violations of the law with firearms, they got to be held accountable.
Absolutely, and it also speaks to, one of the things for our city is we're now the #1 referral of youth to the juvenile system in King County, here in Federal Way. So we're already incarcerating our youth at a really high rate, or youth that are demonstrating criminal behavior. So it comes back, like you said, to that prevention piece, and I think that, I don't know, as a council and a committee, some of the things that maybe we can work on, continue to partner with the police department. I know in June we held a convening of the Federal Way Youth Action Team and some other community partners with the PD. We had a great meeting around that, and I think we can continue to do work like that, but it speaks to, I think, some issues above our pay grade a little bit in terms of state and federal policy, and I think it's just important that we acknowledge that when these things happen as well.
Not to challenge you, but I just want to clarify that statement. When you have the greatest referral in King County, it's school district boundaries. So
School
I want
district, that's
to,
correct.
right, because there's 25,000 more people that live, have Federal Way address, and so I just want to clarify that because we are one of the largest school districts. obviously in King County. But
Thank you for clarifying. Any other questions? Deputy Mayor Honda.
Thank you. On your chart on crime statistics, under drug narcotic offenses, in 2018, year-to-date, there were 270, and 2019, 141. So what I'm hearing from our community is that drugs are everywhere. People watch people shoot up at the grocery store. I haven't seen that, but obviously people have. So from your report, it looks like we have less drugs in the community, or why is this number lower if we're still seeing a lot of drug activity? Or are we not seeing a lot of drug activity?
no, I don't think those numbers reflect the amount of drug usage in our community. What that reflects is the number of arrests. And I could tell you that we are seeing a downward trend in terms of arrests for narcotic usage. For one, with the legalization of marijuana, and two, the officers aren't going to file cases that are not going to be prosecuted. So the current policy right now for felony drugs is if it's less than 1 gram, it will not be prosecuted as a felony. So I think that policy decision is clearly impacting the drug arrest activity of our officers. But I would tell you that it isn't just federal. It encompasses much bigger than that. It's a regional issue. So originally, anything less than 3 grams, we're not going to be prosecuted as a felony. That policy was changed to 1 gram. So clearly, 90% of crime, this is what our crime analyst tells me, 90% of our property crime has a direct nexus to drugs. So bottom line is, this is an area that I feel that our region can do better to arrest individual for a drug charge and maybe force them into treatment, maybe whether it's in a jail facility or another facility, but clearly we're in an opioid epidemic, and I don't know if we turn the corner. We're ready to turn the corner, but until people get off drugs, we're going to continue to have crimes that are associated with it. Anytime you can reduce the dependency of drugs, your overall crime in your community and your society is going to go down, because that addiction is what's driving people to steal cars and go shoplift and steal. And not everybody's a drug addict, a significant number are. So yes, you're seeing a reduction because officers are less willing to put a case together that's not going to be prosecuted.
So are these numbers, are these for people using drugs, or are these offenses for people selling drugs?
It would be everything, anything probably drug-related, whether we do a marijuana house, bust, or, any narcotics, anything drug-related. Now, when you get into NIBRS, that's the title, but underneath that, there's a bunch of different categories that we keep track of. So with NIBRS, we keep track of a lot of subcategory crimes with that title.
Okay. Another question I have is on the firearms. On the statistics that you mentioned, do you break that down into ages, under 18 and over 18? Or how do you do that?
I don't think we keep track of it that way. We would have to look at, if we wanted to retrieve that data, I would have to ask the crime analyst, but my guess is she's going to have to look at each case and, extract those type of information.
Okay. And how long is it taking now to get into the academy for a new officer?
Right now, I think we're probably 4 months. If we hire somebody today and we submit their name in, I think we're out at least 3 or 4 months for them to even get to the academy. The academy is going to be about 5.5 months, and our field training program is another 4 months. So if you hire somebody, if you give me the authorization to hire someone today, we hire someone today, it would be a year, 12 to 15 months out before they're on their own. So we have to be very strategic and plan ahead for adding officers, because that's just how long it takes to get them trained and let them be able to work solo capacity.
One of the things that we all hear is that we need more police officers for a city our size. Is there a magic number that you would like to have as a number of police officers?
You know, I've been the police chief here for 6 years now. I was a deputy chief for, almost 8 years. And so what I know this community, I've been here 23 years, so I know this community inside out. Our community is changing, and it's going to change even more with, light rail coming in. We are going to see a significant increase in people coming to Federal Way to commute from. So when those significant changes occur and we get more urbanized, I think the ratio will change. But what I've said in the past few years is that we need to maintain 1.40 per 1,000 citizen ratio. So simple math, if we get to a population of 100,000, it's my professional recommendation, we need to be at least 140. So right now, our population is about 98,000, so we're at 134 officers. So it puts us at 1.38, but it's important that we don't fall behind. But if there are different things, developments that brings in significant number of people, or a venue that brings a lot of, then the ratio, we would have to look at that again depending on the police demand. But I would tell you right now, if we can maintain at 1.40 per 1,000 residents, I think we'd be doing all right.
Thank you very much. Oh, one more item on domestic violence. Federal Way is one of the lucky cities around. We have a domestic violence task force, and we have other cities that join our task force. And on Wednesday, October 23rd, we're having a workshop, and all electeds are invited, and we're inviting several youth. So you've had the invitation. I hope that you're responding, that you're coming. It is a long day from 3 to 8, but it's going to be worth your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, any other final comments? Councilmember Copang.
Chief, I want to thank you for the presentation. I know they put together in short notice. There's a lot of things to unpack here, and I just want to kind of walk through a few of them just to get a better understanding. Looking at response time, in 2018, we were at 5.8 minutes per incident on average for emergency. And obviously, at 2019, that's up to 6.53. When someone makes a call, those minutes can seem like hours. So I think the objective of the Federal Way Police Department, and certainly with the support of the council, is to keep that response time as low as possible. Can you attribute that difference in time to anything in particular?
I would tell you, I think I kind of explained it. You could have 1 or 2 calls where it comes out as an emergency 3-tone, and then it gets reclassified and everybody slows down. So if you have enough, few of those calls, I can screw that number. I think the more accurate number to look at is really priority 1, because there's a lot more of those. So, yeah, I would tell you that with that, we're 45 seconds later. I don't really have a good answer for you on that. What we do to minimize response time, fire department will have firehouses strategically placed throughout the city to reduce response time. What we do in the police business is we do sector policing. Our city's divided into 4 sectors. We assign officers to sectors, and they're not, as a general rule, they're not to leave their sector, and they stay in their sector to, when we have an emergency call, that's when we want an initial, officer or 2, we want them to get there quickly. So that's kind of how we strategically do our operation day-to-day, to have officers within their sectors. And those sector officers, sometimes, why did it take 2 hours for an officer to come? Well, to prepare for an emergency situation, you're not going to have far end North Car come take a cold call on the south end of the city, because now you're left the north end of the city vulnerable, no one's up there. So sometimes those 2, 3, maybe 4 sector officers, they're taking the calls that's happening in their sector.
Right.
So that's why sometimes you get the long response time. It's organized dispatching system, computer aided. We don't just run around everywhere. So we try to be efficient in that way.
Well, I think to the department's credit, the overall average is down. So I was just interested in that particular number, just from the standpoint that it did stand out.
I got to give you credit. You're very observant. That's very important to know. Yeah, you don't want priority 1 emergency calls to be obviously really high.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. As far as the crime analyst prevention, that next slide, or 2 slides forward, are we comparing The 2018, is that year-to-date for 2018, or is that the full year?
That would be year-to-date, I believe, yeah.
28, the 2018 number would be year-to-date?
That's whole year, and then
Okay.
January to September 2019.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm clear, because what you're saying then is the 2018 numbers, as well as the 2013 through 2017 numbers, are all full-year numbers?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. So for January through September, that's basically 3/4 of the year?
Correct.
Okay, all right. So when I look at those numbers, if I just divide those numbers by 0.75, I get my annual projected number. Looks like we'll be up in bulletins, we'll be up in neighborhood business meetings, which is good. Crime prevention, looks like crime prevention meetings were down a little bit. If you could talk to us a little bit about that and what those entail. Public education presentations, those numbers look like they'd be down a little bit too. I've got, just for your reference, doing my math, I've got 64 versus 94 for the crime prevention meetings, and I've got 53 versus 68 for the public education presentations. I think, but then the crime analyst meetings, which I think are analysis meetings, those are internal meetings, I assume?
Or regional. They
Or regional?
participate quite a bit
Okay.
in regional.
Yeah, and I think those numbers are significantly up. So I guess the question I have is around community engagement. It looks like we're down a little bit in our crime prevention and public education presentations to the community. Is that accurate?
I guess, looking at the numbers, yes, I trust your math. I think
Okay.
we're not, I know, here's what I could tell you, from top down, the expectations from the police chief. Our department motto is earning the public's trust.
Absolutely.
And the only way we're going to earn that trust is to engage with the community. So
Okay.
even for promotions, we actually look at the candidates' interaction with the public, their activities. So we even look at that. So top down as an organization, going to these community meetings, interacting is key, whether it's farmer's market or, I think there's a Halloween trunk or treat event coming up, and our officers will be involved in that. So we got our SROs. We are involved in every aspect of our community, so.
Okay, but as far as getting engaged in the community, is there any support that the council can provide for the police department to make sure that they're getting out in the community as much as possible? Is there any support that we haven't provided that the police department needs?
I would just tell you that we're very appreciative of the support that we get from the council now. And
Okay.
our officers, appreciate that as well. So I think everything, there isn't any, in my opinion, improvement to make from a council policy group to our police department level regarding community events.
Okay.
In fact, I see all of you at all these events quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and then I'm just looking at the different slides that you put together on gun violence in particular. Those are year versus 3/4 of the year numbers, right?
Correct.
Annually? Okay, as
That's
opposed
correct.
to being year-to-date. Okay. So looking at these numbers, again, I think we're down a little bit, or actually down, I'm projecting 10.66 based on the same math formula that I used for the other numbers versus 16 for threats with a gun. Shots fired, no injury. We're up, but that's, and we would be at 16 if projections were accurate based on that formula. Shots fired with injury, about the same, 14.6 is the number.
I want to say this because it's good to kind of anticipate or predict, but boy, I tell you.
No, we can't do that, right. No, and I understand that, but I guess when you're comparing.
Sure.
We like to do apples for apples as much as we can, and I think,
Sure.
It may be helpful for us to have 3/4 of the year versus 3/4 of the year from 2018 in the future, just so we're not creating a false narrative.
Sure.
Which certainly was not the intention on your part, and I'm certainly not saying that, but I do think that I think it's a better and more accurate comparison for us, just so we can understand. Because some of these things are seasonal. I mean, there's some things that just, there's no explanation for it. It just happens.
I'll give you one example. People say, hey, summer's coming, and, summer hasn't even begun. We're going to see a lot of violence. I'm telling you, this summer was like
It's easy.
It was easy.
Yeah.
And then, October comes along and, for our community, it's unusual to have 3 shootings in a span of 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
It's very concerning.
Okay. Well, Chief, thank you. Appreciate the report. Also, I think the guidance that you're giving the council, and that we really do need to get up to 1.4 at some point. I think, again, we are a hub here in South King County between all the different things that happen, the confluence of 99 and I-5 and Highway 16 and Tacoma. I mean, it's all right here. It's really interesting. So
It's like the
Yeah.
latest shooting. If the convenience store wasn't there, rural area, you wouldn't have had the incident. It's just that, their stores are open and they're in Federal Way.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
And I will just add to that too, even the Wild Wave shooting, there were 5 officers present
Yes.
when that shooting occurred, you know what I mean? So, again, I want to reiterate that crime prevention is not always police job. It's
Yeah.
a community collaboration, and I think, when we're talking about our youth, that's one of the biggest reasons we wanted to provide funding for Youth Action Team. We're talking about it for our legislative priorities. We just had our after-school funding, because we want to make sure that we provide a reason for youth to feel empowered. Because to pick up a gun as a youth and to shoot someone, you really must feel a sense of hopelessness and a reason not to want to live, and so we have to give them a reason to live. And so I think it's really important that we look at that. I know November 20th, Youth Action Team will be partnering again with the PD and school resource officers on these discussions, so it's just important we continue that effort. And I want to say too, publicly, when we had that meeting in June, we had officers there that were not in police uniforms. They were in regular clothes, engaging with youth, and so that work is happening. We just have to continue to do that.
Yeah.
Councilmember Moore?
Thank you so much, Chair Johnson. Chief, thanks for this briefings. I know that we appreciate it. I appreciate it. Just to kind of get into the specifics, I guess, a little bit, to the extent that you're willing to share, and we're just kind of starting to talk about it, but the last 3 shootings, one of them, most of them were involved with young people, were they not?
2 of the incidents, the victims were younger people. Yes, 2 of the incidents. The other, third incident involved a 36-year-old, and we haven't revealed any information on
Right.
the potential suspects.
Yeah. So if that's not any clearer, I don't know what is. And I think, Councilmember Johnson, I think you're absolutely right. I think we've got to change the trajectory of how we move ahead in supporting our youth and diminishing these type of acts. And I think some of this we're going to partake in a difficult conversations. I'm in the schools every week, and I think about our youth quite a bit. And I was just telling someone the other day that has become my unexpected issue that I've been fighting for during my second term. I didn't campaign about it, but this is just something that unexpectedly landed on my desk. And I really feel strongly that as we go into the next budget cycle, that needs to be a continuation of conversations. And as we enter into the legislative priorities discussions, again, that has to be a discussion. Our youth need to be in the forefront, especially youth at risk. And there's a lot of opportunities that we're just not seeking, and that are out there. And so we have pivotal partnerships. I saw Jason Clark, who's doing amazing things. I know MSC, not MRSC. MSC does phenomenal work, and Credible Messengers. Everybody. There's opportunities to build relationships and work together to try and diminish this. So, yeah.
Councilmember Copain.
Yeah, I think the council made a big commitment to have this conversation with the continuation of implementation of the Violence Prevention Coalition Steering Committee recommendations. And again, I know that the police department has been very supportive, and Chief, you've been very supportive of those programs and that kind of engagement. Again, I wanted to echo both Councilmember Johnson and Councilmember Moore's comments in that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I think providing that kind of support to the organizations within our community that are doing good work is going to continue to be part of, I think, my vision as a member of the council. I think the Boys and Girls Club is another organization that's been very good. Then there's the Communities and Schools organization, which has helped. Again, we're creating connections between generations. We're creating relationships with people that young people that don't necessarily have positive role models in their lives. So, again, I think that one of the things I really love about our community is the willingness that I've seen on the part of so many to really roll up their sleeves and be a part of the solution as opposed to waiting for it to happen. So I think that we as a council certainly want to continue to support those programs, but I think we also need to continue to look to the community to be partners with these organizations, with the police department, with the council, in continuing the efforts. So.
If I may, I
Yes,
want to
Chief.
maybe add why young people, make poor decisions. And, everyone, even, young people to us, I mean, we want to be valued. We want to have self-worth, right? So many of us have jobs and meaningful jobs, and we have, families. And so what happens with these young people that go down the wrong path is that they're getting that value or feeling of, self-worth with individuals who are involved in, illicit, illegal activity, pat on the back. That they become friends and their support and their family. So anything we can do. I mean, you see it in, I work with young people, whether they're involved in sports, and you can see it. They get their self-worth from playing sports and being good at it, or they get a good grade and they, share. I can say that with my kids. They'll be really proud of a grade. And that's how they get their, self-worth. If we can just grasp that with all young people, right? They wouldn't be going down that path because they know that what they're doing is right. So that's the challenge.
Councilmember Moore.
Thank you. Chief, on my handouts on page 11, but it's the title of the slide is shots fired injury. And I'm just guessing, but I'm going to ask a question. I think that's the slide I'm kind of curious about. I'm certain you guys keep tight records and data on when there are shots fired, what type of gun it is. Is that correct?
Oh, it's in the case file. I don't know that it's going to be NIBRs or what, but our crime analysts obviously could retract it from all the reports. Sure.
Okay. I think I'd be curious to find out what type of guns are on the street that people are utilizing. So that's a curiosity on my end.
Are you asking if they're like pistols or rifles?
Yeah, exactly. Or AK-47s or automatics.
Vast majority.
I don't know my guns.
Vast
so-
majority pistols.
What? A
Vast majority are handgun pistols. Yeah, for concealment purposes, people on the streets aren't, maybe it's in their trunk or something like that, but most of these shootings, I can tell you just 99% are pistols. People are getting shot with handguns.
And to that point too, though, there is opportunity. I know that the city of Edmonds has implemented a lost and stolen gun ordinance. There's examples out there of some things we can do. I'm not sure around the data of how well that served their community, but we will be discussing that in December, potential ordinance around lost and stolen guns within the city of Federal Way at this committee, because I think it's important that we do at least have an idea of when crimes are committed, are they being committed by guns that have been lost or stolen or retrieved from family, like you said earlier. What can we do around that? And then if we have an ordinance in place, maybe it will incentivize, better safekeeping and things like that. But I did want to mention that as well. We'll be talking about that in December. And we'll also be reaching out to other cities that may have done some of that work. There's not many examples within our state, but around the region in the country, around those efforts.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to that conversation, especially, I think the city of Edmonds, is that who has it? Yeah, and I'm curious, how long have they had it, do you know?
It was implemented in February
Of this year?
of 2018, so it's been a
2018.
year and a half.
Exactly. So I'm very curious to see how that's working, if there's an impact on that, or has it helped? And so I'm very much looking forward to the conversation and exploring that as a committee, so.
Deputy Mayor Honda?
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson made a statement earlier tonight that a student told him that guns were as easy to get as gum at school. And I'd like your opinion about that. We, in probably a year and a half ago, in the Domestic Violence Task Force meeting, we had a discussion about guns and domestic violence. And someone stated that if someone had, if an offender had to turn in their weapon to the police department, that they would just go out on the street and get another one. And a police officer that was at that meeting said that it's just not that simple. It's people say that, but it's just not as simple as just going out on the street corner and getting a gun. What is your opinion of that? Do you think that our youth have more access to guns, as the child stated at school today to Councilmember Johnson, or I'd like your professional opinion.
I don't know if it's that easy, but I think if somebody wants to get a gun or determined to get a gun, they could probably get a gun. And I would say a lot of the guns that are that the criminals have are stolen guns that they steal from vehicles or residential burglaries, sometimes commercial facility, businesses. But there are guns out there. There are stolen guns out there. So if somebody's determined to get it, I think that they can get it. And young people have fascination with guns. The level of violence that they're exposed to, whether it's a movie, video game, not all kids. Some kids really, want to, possess a weapon. And so I would tell you that it's not that easy, but I think if somebody wants to get a gun, I think there's guns out there that young people can get.
Thank you.
Committee, any other final questions for the chief? Great. Thank you, Chief, again for all of your information and for being willing to come today in light of the recent shootings and to deliver the crime report. Really appreciate your information and insight and expertise.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So item F, we have Community Development Block Grant 2020-2024 Consolidated Plan and 2020 Annual Action Plan. We have Sarah Bridgeford, and she's going to be here for our remaining 4 items. So Sarah, I hope you had your coffee.
Yes, always. And I will also be joined by Joseph Adriano, who is the CDBG and Human Services Coordinator. He'll be presenting on the Annual Action Plan. So I will start off with our 2020 through 2024 Consolidated Plan and the 2020 Annual Action Plan. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present this. This is going to be a fairly high-level overview. There's a lot of content in this document. We will provide some information on the CDBG program, the needs assessment, corresponding goals and strategies for the 2020 through 2024 period, and then how the funds will be utilized in 2020. So for our overview, the CDBG program is through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. The city of Federal Way is an entitlement city or community, and our annual allocation is based on population, poverty, and housing data. So it's a formula grant where we receive that amount. We submit the consolidated plan and annual action plans and annual reports as well to HUD, and then we receive that, that allocation based on their formula. CDBG has 3 goals. Their goals are to provide decent housing, a suitable living environment, and expand economic opportunity. All funded activities must meet one of these 3 goals to be funded through our program. In addition to the 3 goals, there's something called national objectives. What we have are 3 national objectives. The first is a low moderate income benefit, slum and blight, and urgent need. The City of Federal Way really doesn't have areas that qualify under slum and blight at this point, and hopefully we don't. That's a good thing for the city. We also don't have urgent need at this point, which tends to be natural disasters and those types of things that would result in a lot of housing support and other support in response to those disasters. So what we do have, though, is nearly 100% of our funds going to low and moderate income benefit. That excludes from the calculation things like planning and admin. Just to give you a data point and a reference, for a household of 4, that means all of our services would serve households of 4 that have income at or below $88,000, roughly. And that's for 2019. That changes on an annual basis. And that's the area median income, so 80% of the area median income. Oops. Sorry. Oh, that is right. So our eligible uses for CDBG, just a few examples that you'll see here, are housing rehabilitation, repair, and acquisition, economic development and job creation, improving public facilities, so that can be a variety of different centers, shelters, it can be some park facilities. It's all a matter of priorities and goals for the program. And then public services, which is a wide array of services. There is a cap. Joseph will be talking about that in the annual action plan portion. For our consolidated plan, HUD requires this every 5 years. It covers that 5-year period, again, 2020 through 2024, and it guides the investment of the dollars that we receive for our CDBG program. The COM plan also includes the first annual action plan, so that is the 2020 program year. For our process, the city engaged with nonprofit partners, residents, and many other stakeholders in evaluating the needs and developing the goals and strategies to address them, all within the context of the CDBG goals and eligible activities. The engagement included interviews, surveys, participation in existing meetings, hosting of meetings, the use of information provided via reports and other monitorings with grantees, both for the CDBG program and our general fund dollars. There are a lot of other data sources that are included in the plan. The primary data source that you'll see in the consolidated plan is going to be the 2013 through 2017 American Community Survey data. There are a couple of places where we have other outside data sources, or it's 2011 through 2015 ACS data, because that's the most current evaluation that was available. So again, as part of this, we assessed the needs in the community using publicly available data. All of the decisions are data-driven. And then for setting goals that are consistent with the national objectives that inform our strategies to address the identified needs. I'll give, again, a fairly high-level overview of the needs identified. The 4 categories that we'll see really stand out in relation to the CDBG program are going to be that the workforce has multiple challenges. Housing affordability continues to be a concern here locally as well as regionally. The region lacks infrastructure to address homelessness, and then a need for increasing quality of life. So here you'll see that we have our highest 3 sectors for employment are education and healthcare, retail trade, arts, entertainment, and accommodation. So this is ACS 11 through 15. That's a slightly older data set, that was the most recent available for this particular information. And what we would note that we want to track and look at opportunities to provide employment and training to residents is that the second highest sector is retail trade, which is particularly vulnerable during recessions and something that we just want to be working on, that how are residents accessing more of those livable wage jobs and things that have some security through recessions, even if they're not the Great Recession. Here we see that 3/4 of the residents from Federal Way actually commute outside of the city of Federal Way. So we have 78% of our residents who have some level of commute compared to 47 throughout King County. We would anticipate that may change with the transit-oriented development, as I think Chief Hwang mentioned earlier, so it's something to watch. This could impact a lot of our work and community services and things that we'll pay attention to in the con plan. Here you'll...
Sarah, just a quick question.
Yeah.
Can you quantify that 78%? Is that 78% of working age or 78% of all federal residents? I mean, how does that number quantify?
78% of residents who are working.
Okay.
Yep. So it's,
So what is that number?
yes, good questions. It is in the consolidated plan, so I can pull that up and I'll get back to you.
Okay, or maybe
Actually,
Joseph can look for it,
Joseph-
so you can continue the presentation. I know I'm interrupting, but I think these numbers need context.
Yeah, and there's a lot of information in the con plan, so we're just providing that snapshot here. I would also note that in general, our young people have a higher unemployment rate than that of the county. So what we see for 16 through 19-year-olds, 28% are unemployed compared to 20%, and then it's 11 to 10 for the 20 through 24. For the city, our population as a whole has the lower attainment of four-year degrees and higher degrees. That's also true for Federal Way youth, where that percentage is even less, or less percentage compared to the county. Housing affordability continues to be a concern. 52% of renters experience cost burden, which means that they pay more than 30% of their income towards rent. For homeowners, we see about 28% in the same time period experiencing cost burden. This one, just really quickly, I would note that the median gross rent in Federal Way is $1,156. You can see the comparison from other cities there. That is, of course, up from what it was 5 years ago when we did this process last time.
These numbers are 2 years old though, right?
That is correct, yes. Yep. And there will be more current data. It will be too late for this plan, anticipated in December from the 2018 ACS figures. So this slide I'm going to explain a little bit. I think it's a good slide to show you where the gaps in housing are, which I think have been discussed by planning staff and other staff at the city multiple times. So with this, it displays the number of housing units that are affordable to different income levels. So if we take the second section on that graph, what you'll see in that dark blue bar is the number of households by income level. So we see roughly 8,000 households that have income between $25,000 and $49,999 on an annual basis. And then the three bars behind that are then the rents that would be considered affordable. So at that income, we're looking at $500 to about $1,000. That particular grouping, we have about the number of units that we would expect for that income. Where we have gaps are going to be at our lower end, so our lowest income households, and then at the higher end, so looking more at those luxury homes. That's in alignment with information that's been provided to council by others, where we look at our growth management targets, and the city would have a target of 12% for that 30% or lower AMI, area median income. And we have about 2% of units affordable to that, that income bracket. Okay. And this chart shows that as well. So that's information that we've discussed before, but something that this program can look at addressing.
Sarah, for the benefit of the viewers, this lowest number, is that representative of the numbers for the county as well? I think my understanding has been that the less than 25,000 affordable or low income, that's consistent within King County. There's just not a lot of those housing units available.
That is correct. Okay. We are certainly not alone in not meeting the target for 30% AMI.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So when we look at homelessness, this continues to be a pressing problem in the city. City Council has set this as a priority, I believe, for the second year in a row, and the task force had concluded its work last year. this committee will be continuing those conversations. I'll just note a couple things. There's more information in the report as well, that 124 unsheltered persons were counted in Federal Way in 2019. In general, when we think about the point-in-time count, which is where that information is from, we think of it as an undercount. Its constraints include the number of volunteers that we have, that a lot of people who are unsheltered are trying not to be found. So we're going out in the middle of the night and doing this count and often don't have access. 25% of deaths of unsheltered homeless persons or people experiencing homelessness in South King County were actually in Federal Way in 2018. That information was provided in the Homelessness Task Force report through public health.
And Sarah, just to clarify, so for South King County, what is that exactly include?
So South King County is almost anything, thank you. Almost anything that is south of Seattle. It includes Tukwila and except for the north and east. So it's anything in that south region.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Sarah, so for the deaths, the 25% of the deaths that were in Federal Way, are those, do you know the causes? I know that public health does list the causes if they know the causes.
Yeah.
But do you know how many of those deaths were due to exposure, or how many were due to drug abuse or some other kind of addiction?
I don't off the top of my head, but I can get that information. I do believe from the recollection of the task force work that it was largely a mix of health concerns that were existing as well as drug use. And I don't know that we had exposure or things that would be directly attributed. Oftentimes there's an interaction
Right.
with multiple barriers.
Okay, thank you.
So here, we'll just note needs for increasing quality of life. A lot of our housing was built before 1980, so for CDBG, we look at home repair, including work on removing lead hazards from homes. North Federal Way has older housing units. North Federal Way is of particular focus with the neighborhood revitalization strategy area, so we're continuing that work as part of this consolidated plan that was approved in 2016 by the city and by HUD. And in North Federal Way, about 70% of households have low to moderate income, low to moderate incomes. And before I go on to goals, Joseph did find our numbers, and you're going to have about 37,000, you're going to have to tell me what this, 37,000 workers are commuting outside of Federal Way.
Thank you. That actually corresponds with the number that I had heard, so I appreciate the confirmation.
Yep. So corresponding to some of the biggest needs that were identified, we have goals that are largely a continuation of the previous consolidated plan with the call out of homelessness as the third goal in our con plan. So the first goal will be expand economic opportunities, and the strategies are the creation and growth of businesses, adding jobs that have livable wages, promoting an environment in which new businesses and expanding businesses find it attractive and want to locate here. The second goal is to preserve affordable housing, and here we're looking at supporting homeownership and preserving affordable housing that's existing. Prevent and address homelessness is the third goal. And those strategies are homelessness prevention. Typically, we think of rent assistance and other types of programs that can intervene before a household becomes homeless or experiences homelessness. And then the second strategy is to support facilities to fill gaps in the homeless services system. For our fourth goal, we have suitable living environments, which include the strategies of providing services to help households move towards self-sufficiency, providing services in crisis or at risk, and then building a vibrant community through facilities and activities focusing on deteriorating neighborhoods. So what we're thinking of in most of our suitable living environment services, it's going to be a wide range of public services that move people from crisis and into that stability, hopefully moving out of poverty. It's anticipated that the city will have a 5-year funding amount of about $3.6 million for 2020 through 2024. That includes an anticipated $691,143 in annual CDBG funds, as well as about $157,000 anticipated in prior year resource, and that would be expended in 2020. The prior year resource would be. And now we have the annual action plan. We can answer additional questions on the consolidated plan after Joseph goes through the annual action plan.
Right, so thank you for having me to discuss this portion as well. So just continuing off of where Sarah left off, the annual action plan covers the first year of the consolidated plan, and so that would be for 2020. Again, this is a requirement from the federal government, from HUD, and it covers, it's supposed to cover specific actions, strategies, and activities that the city will undertake to carry out the first year of the consolidated plan. So just as an overview, again, the goals for 2020 will be to expand economic opportunities, provide decent, affordable housing, and establish suitable living environments. Just to follow along with what Sarah just mentioned about the funding amount, specifically for 2020, we're anticipating about $849,000 in funding for CDBG. That includes the $691,000 that Sarah mentioned, along with just under $158,000 from previous years. So that amount gets broken down. This pie graph talks about how that amount will be broken down. About 20%, a max of 20% can go toward planning and administration activities. Those are, that's subject to a cap that's set by the regulations that govern CDBG. About 15% of the annual allocation can go toward those public services that Sarah discussed, and the rest go to what we call community economic revitalization funding, and we'll go specifically into those projects here. So that amount for 2020 going to program administration will be about $134,000. And for public services, that 15%, just as a note on these services that you see here, these all go through a competitive application process, They include the Federal Way Community Center's inclusion program at $29,000, multi-service center's rental assistance at $32,800, Pediatric Interim Care Center, that's a service that assists drug-exposed infants at $10,000. Multi-Service Center's YES program at $12,178. Orion Employment Services at $10,000. And apprenticeship and non-traditional employment for women at $8,670. And the final category is the Community Economic Revitalization Funding. About $175,000 will go to the city's housing repair program. Debt services for the PAC will be at $235,217. The city's code compliance, $76,000. Habitat for Humanity housing repair program at $62,000. That program, I should note, will focus on the neighborhood revitalization area in North Federal Way. Also focusing on that area is the Highline College SBDC and Start Zone program, the entrepreneurship program at $30,000. And also at $30,000, Highline College, again with the same program, but outside of the neighborhood revitalization area. So I can do this, but do you want to do? Oh, okay. Oh.
So for this, we actually started planning and doing work on this back in spring of 2019. I think our first public meeting was at a Human Services Commission in March, and that was the first conversation that led into surveys, interviews, and many other meetings with both individuals, groups, and larger community gatherings. For the formal process with the consolidated plan and the annual action plan, once the draft was complete, we published notification on August 30th, which opened the public comment period. To date, we have not received a formal public comment. I do understand that there may be some letters that are coming in as well soon, so next week that may change. The public comment period does conclude next week at 4 p.m. We will have a public hearing at City Council where additional comments can be made. We will submit to HUD, this is with a caveat, we say November 15th. We are required to submit 45 days before the start of our program year. In the past, HUD has released a memo that requires that grantees hold off on submitting until we have our actual allocation. You'll see that reflected in the motion language. This has been true of our annual action plan in the past 3 or so years, that we have not been able to submit because we haven't had our annual allocation. So what that means is we proceed with our planning process as if we will submit on November 11th. If HUD and the federal government does not have a budget approved and the allocations determined, that will be later than November 11th. But we go through this process and allow for some pro rata adjustments as appropriate based on the actual allocation. Our program year begins on January 1st of 2020. Regardless of when we get our allocation, that is our program year, we can incur some pre-award costs that do not impact future projects. And then the consolidated plan period will run from January 1st of 2020 through December 31st of 2024. And Joseph and I would be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Sarah and Joseph, for your presentations. Committee, any questions? Deputy Mayor Honda.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, and it's really interesting to read through this whole packet of the information you provided for us. We hear a lot about protected classes. Can you explain to us what a protected class is and why there's differences between the federal, state of Washington, and King County?
I think you might be referencing the 2019 King County Analysis of Impediments to Fair Housing Choice.
Yes, I am.
Which would be...
I'm early, okay.
And that's okay. I mean, I can't address that, but we also will be talking about that in the presentation on that.
Okay.
Sarah, the only question I have, as far as like assessment of how well the services we provide by the end of 2024 how can we involve the stakeholders within the community that are going to be impacted by these services? Is there a way that we can do that, or have we done that in the past?
Not directly. So we look at performance outcomes and targets as proposed in the contracts. That is true across all of our grant programs, so including our general fund program. What we have done is we base our contracts on the applications and what's proposed. We have not gone out to clientele of different programs. There's a confidentiality piece that would come into play with that. It doesn't mean that we can't approach different conversations with our agencies when they maybe already have client satisfaction surveys. Some programs do, some don't. Some have different staffing levels for larger programs. They may have that kind of data. We could look at, is that something that we can get? I don't know that I see an immediate way of evaluating individual programs without violating some of that confidentiality, but we can talk about that further.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask that question and I think the surveys could get at some of that maybe. Perhaps we can do something where we can at least assess how well they feel like the services were provided.
Yep, without having a specific, so thinking more like category based?
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, do I have a motion?
Yes, I move to forward the 2020 to 2024 consolidated plan and the 2020 annual action plan to the October 15th, 2019 agenda for approval.
I will second.
Long pause there. Any further
Another
discussion?
pregnant pause.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thanks. Next, we have Sarah again, 2019 King County Analysis of Impediments to Fair Housing Choice.
I'll say thank you again for the opportunity, Chair Johnson and members of the committee and Deputy Mayor Honda. With the King County analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, the reason that we come forward with the King County plan is that we participate in the King County Home Consortium. So we receive our own entitlement for CDBG, but not for the home program. The county administers that across the county. And as such, we participate in their analysis of impediments. They do the analysis for all jurisdictions in King County that the plan does not cover, even though you might see data regarding Seattle and then parts of Milton, or all of Milton, I guess. The plan does not cover Seattle. It does cover the rest of King County. So what is the AI? So the AI is analysis of impediments, again, and that is, like I said, conducted on behalf of the entire region. It will gather information. You'll see a lot of data that's presented in this plan. They look specifically at barriers to fair housing choice, and it guides policy and funding decisions on housing that both ends discrimination and overcomes historic patterns of segregation. It's required by HUD that we have an approved AI in place for our CDBG program. I will note that by participating in the King County AI, we as a city can select certain priorities and goals that we're working towards. There are some that with 2020 we will already be doing, and then there may be others throughout the comp plan that we'll add in. We do not have to work on all of the goals, and with the amount of funding that we receive, we would say that it's also not possible to address all of them, at least not with funding. But community feedback on housing, King County did a lot of work to get information both from existing quantified data sources, as well as community outreach, interviews, meetings, similar to what we do for our con plan. And what they found is that for rental housing, rent increases have made the area increasingly unaffordable. Building renovations have displaced renters. We see that here in Federal Way. And that affordability among there's affordability among low-quality units. So when we think about the rental housing inspection program and what the city is looking at with that proposed program, that would be an example of one of the efforts there. The ownership market, affordability among older homes and newer homes is too costly. Young families can't afford homes. We're finding that the younger generations are not able to enter into homeownership if they would like, and that often we're seeing that elderly are being displaced from their homes. They can't afford it for a variety of reasons. The plan or the analysis identified that we need more affordable housing across the county. We need to protect mobile home parks, provide more education on housing discrimination and tenants' rights. This is the information that Deputy Mayor Honda was referencing for fair housing, that when we look at protected classes, the Federal Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination on specific classes. You'll see those in that left-hand column. It's race, color, national origin, religion, sex, disability, familial status. The state of Washington has additional protections that have been put in place in addition to the federal. And those cover the whole state, which are creed, marital status, veteran military status, use of service or assistive animals, and source of income. So source of income, we mean any type of subsidy. Most commonly, you're going to think of housing choice vouchers or Section 8 as that subsidy, but it can be anything. You might have a household that's receiving income from a family member to support their rent or whatever it might be, where that can't be used against them in qualifying. And then for King County, they also include age and ancestry, but that's in unincorporated. So as they've adopted policies that protect them, those would be the categories that they've added in. Does that answer the question? Just it's based on region and.
So in a way it does. So for King County, what do they mean by age and ancestry?
So I don't actually know without revisiting. They do describe that, hold on. Yeah, with this many items, I have
You don't need to
a
tell
lot
me
of
now.
paperwork.
It's okay, you don't need to tell me now. If you could just get back to me about it.
Sure.
I'd appreciate it.
Yeah. And other local jurisdictions have some individual protections. If you'll remember, with source of income, several jurisdictions had adopted that in advance of the state adopting that. So sometimes this will just change based on
Okay.
the order of adoption.
All right, thank you.
Yep. So as part of the analysis of impediments, we did testing for housing discrimination. This was a collaboration with King County and the entitlement communities, as well as cities that receive CDBG that's administered through King County. Some of that included individual tests within the city of Federal Way. Overall, I would note that it is a very small sample size, and when I talk about Federal Way, we're looking at three tests, 3 out of 5. So we had 5 tests in Federal Way. It's expensive to do this testing. One of the recommendations and the goals that you'll see is actually to continue to do fair housing testing. So the testing was conducted by the Fair Housing Center of Washington. Of the 82 tests that were conducted countywide, 39 or 48% were positive for violations of fair housing law. So they showed signs of differential treatment based on protected classes and discriminatory policies that placed additional barriers on housing due to the protected classes that a person has. In Federal Way, we're slightly higher than that countywide average. Again, it's a very small sample size, so we say that knowing that we would likely need to do additional testing for this purpose, but we do call out that 60% of the 5 tests in Federal Way showed signs of discrimination. It's something that, in general, in our field, we anticipate, and it's not surprising to us. Having the numbers that match the experience that we hear from providers and residents is always concerning, though, and we may be able to do additional testing in the future. The goals identified in the analysis of impediments start with the first one, which is invest in programs that provide education and enforcement of fair housing laws. Engage underrepresented communities in ongoing efforts to understand barriers and increase access to opportunity. Provide more housing for vulnerable populations. More housing choices for people with large families. That was one of the categories that we county-wide don't have enough of. Support efforts to increase housing stability. Preserve and increase affordable housing in communities at high risk of displacement. Review zoning laws to increase density. Work with communities to engage in community revitalization efforts, and then support the Affordable Housing Committee's efforts to promote fair housing. The Affordable Housing Committee is the entity that came out of the Regional Affordable Housing Task Force. They do continue to meet and have picked up their work and are kicking that off. We do participate in the staff committee for the AHC and can provide updates as that goes along. Be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Sarah. Councilmember Copain.
Sarah, I think any discrimination whatsoever when it comes to housing or anything is unacceptable.
Yes.
I see that, we had 5 tests in Federal Way. 3 of them tested positive, which would be 60%. But how many rental units do we have in Federal Way?
I mean, thousands, yes. And
I just,
Yep.
I question the statistical significance of this number. And I know that you said you're going to do additional testing. It's almost inflammatory in this context. So I appreciate the perspective, but we are talking about 5 out of thousands.
That's correct.
Okay, so I think it really would be good for us to get a much larger, what would you consider a statistically significant sample size to really determine the level of discrimination that potentially exists within our community?
Realistically, that's probably more than we can afford with our funding source.
What would that number be, though?
I am not a statistician.
Okay.
I would think hundreds, that you would need to do a lot of testing here. I think it is not meant to be, as I said earlier, it obviously is a very small sample size.
Yes.
But when we think about fair housing and what we're hearing from our community partners, it is not out of line. 60% maybe is high across all households, that we certainly have discrimination, and that is something that we should work to address.
Absolutely, completely agree. I just want to make sure that we have an accurate understanding of what
Yes.
that is, so we can move forward appropriately.
Yes.
And if it's, I mean, this is a very high number, so it's very concerning. So,
Yep.
thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'm going to sneeze.
Okay. Well, I don't have any other questions, so thank you, Sarah. Do I have a motion?
I'll be happy to give it. I move to forward the 2019 King County Analysis of Impediments to Fair Housing Choice to the October 15th, 2019 agenda for approval.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have a resolution encouraging investments in affordable housing and supportive housing through sales tax in accordance with laws of 2019, Chapter 338, HB 1406. Sarah?
Excellent. Thank you again. I appreciate this opportunity. Amanda Santo was able to be here earlier, but could not stay for this presentation. And if you will allow me to just shift gears here for a moment, I'll. Okay. So in July, we did a quick update on the House Bill 1406 and presented an opportunity that tied to qualifying tax. So I'll cover some of the same information and present to you the resolution. This presentation will cover both the resolution and the ordinance. If the committee does move the items forward, we will present on the ordinance at council next week, but not the resolution, which would go to consent. Oops. So in 2019, the Washington State Legislature passed the substitute House Bill 1406, and this bill focuses on affordable housing. It allows cities and counties to recapture a portion of the existing sales tax, so we would adopt a sales and use tax that is deducted from the existing sales and use tax. The passage of the resolution and corresponding ordinance do not increase the current sales tax rate. The funds may be used in the following ways. They actually have quite a bit of flexibility. So it allows cities and counties to use the funds to acquire, rehabilitate, or construct affordable housing. It can fund the operation and maintenance costs of new units. And for cities that have populations of less than 100,000, it can be used to provide rental assistance. I won't go into detail again. This graph is just to show you it's a different topic, but I did cover it earlier. What we're looking at are the two biggest gaps in housing in the city, which are at that lower end and that higher end. Again, in alignment with the region. This program would focus on that lower end. It would actually cover up to the 60% area median income. And then again, we look at our rental units, that 52% of renters will experience cost burden, paying more than 30% of their income towards rent. So the impact for the city is that this is actually a really unique funding opportunity. Typically, we don't look at the funding that we have and think of housing. Our CDBG is a pretty limited fund. It does a lot of other things. We have a lot of other goals that go with it. This would be a dedicated revenue source, which is a good opportunity for the city to set its own priorities for its funding and do so without, again, increasing that existing tax. And the flexibility, as I expressed earlier, there are a lot of uses that these funds can be used for, and the funding is available for up to 20 years. The funds will be available quickly. If the resolution and ordinance are passed, we anticipate having the funds in January based on the turnaround with the state. And the funds may also be pooled regionally to maximize the impact. I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. That would be in coordination with the South King Housing and Homelessness Partners, which the city participates with nine total cities and King County. So the funding available via House Bill 1406, you'll see up here that we have a couple options. Without a qualifying tax, the City Federal Way would be eligible to recapture 0.0073% of the existing sales tax. Again, you impose a tax, but it's deducted from the tax that goes to the state at this point. That amount is anticipated to be roughly $124,142. That number is based on the 2018 sales tax. Actual revenue will be based on the 2019 amount. If the city also pursued a qualifying tax, then we could recapture 0.0146% of the existing sales tax. As it stands now, the city does not have a qualifying tax, and we would only qualify for that lower amount, and then the second half of those funds go to King County. Just so you have the information, again, qualifying taxes that are allowed to access that higher amount include a tax that King County has already enacted. That one is on chemical dependency and mental health, so we're not eligible for that tax. And then the others are tied to both property tax and levy lifts, as well as the sales tax in 82.14.530. And that one is specific to affordable housing. They would all be voter initiatives. The process for participating in the House Bill 1406 opportunity includes passing a resolution of intent by January of 2020 and an ordinance by July of 2020. And there is no financial impact for participating, though we might have some staff time that wouldn't be charged that it will be required to implement the plan for the use of the funds. So to prioritize and use the funds, should council pass the resolution of intent and a subsequent ordinance, the policies and recommendation for prioritizing the use of the funds will be prepared and then come to this committee. Rehabilitation, acquisition, and construction are generally encouraged as they have longer-term impact on affordable housing in the community. So that's specifically referencing the ability to use the funds for rental assistance if the population is less than 100,000. There is an immediate impact, but in longer-term sustainability of affordable housing, we'd be looking at other opportunities to maximize the use of the funds. And that would be a recommendation from regional entities such as SCIP and the Affordable Housing Committee as well. Pooling funds with SCIP, that's the South King Housing and Homelessness Partners. In general, SCIP has come out in support of, they haven't made a formal motion, but they do support pooling of funds as the most effective means by which to invest in affordable housing. Part of the reason for that is capital projects are expensive. With our CDBG funds, we're actually supporting a renovation at one of the affordable housing complexes that Multi-Service Center owns. We've talked about that before with council, and they're doing a security door replacement and some other needed repairs there. That project, initially was anticipated to be, I think, about $120,000 or so, and it went up to $175,000 once we got bids in. It is actually higher than that, and that's a very common experience, and that's a relatively small rehab. So when we think about the ability for $124,000 to be used for something like rehab, it's a fairly small amount. That's where pooling can become really important in maximizing the use of the funds. The SCIP conversation that happened at their last executive board meeting did include that should cities want to pool funds, so the cities that participate in SCIP, that they would work out a process by which cities can have a deciding factor in projects that happen within their city. So as it rotates through, there may be different priorities by city. So the recommendation is to become a participating city by imposing the sales and use tax allowed by the substitute House Bill 1406, which will be deducted from the existing sales and use tax. This tax, again, will not increase the existing sales and use tax rate. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Sarah, thank you for your presentation. Committee, do we have any questions? Councilmember Copeland.
I just want to be very clear. This is money, this is revenue that's going to the county that would be reallocated back to, or the state that'd be reallocated back to the city.
That is correct,
Okay.
yes.
So
Correct. Yep.
Again, we're not raising taxes.
No.
It's a reallocation of existing tax revenue. Okay.
That is correct, yes. It does read, I will just note, if you read the resolution and the ordinance, and even the House Bill 1406, it is imposing a tax, but it's credited against the existing sales tax. So it can be just something that I would note, that when you read it, it does sound like it's imposing a tax, as it is, and then there's language in there that talks about the deduction from the state portion.
Good. Thank you.
Any other questions? One thing I wanted to note as well, so this funding can also be used for rental assistance for people such as seniors or people that are on fixed incomes or low to moderate incomes. So that's part of the process as well, right?
In talking about the prioritizing of funds, yes. As I mentioned, in general, we would look at, as appropriate, maximizing the use of the funds, which we would say would be largely about preservation of affordable housing that's existing, because there's a longer-term impact. We also do recognize that families and households in Federal Way and in the region have crisis and need rental assistance. We support rental assistance through both CDBG and our general fund program, and that would be part of the conversation when talking about prioritizing the use of these funds on whether or not that is the way to maximize the impact.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Honda?
Thank you. So this would increase the amount of money we have available for rental assistance that we currently use?
It could be used that way. It could also be used for preservation projects like the Multi-Service Center, Affordable Housing Complex. So
Okay.
there are a couple of viable uses there for the city. And then if, as anticipated, if the city's population goes over 100,000, that becomes an ineligible use as well, the rental assistance.
So if we are over 100,000 in 2020 in this census, would that take effect immediately?
Once the data is available, as you saw with our consolidated plan presentation, we're working off of 2017 data right now, so that's a couple years out. If the state updates their population estimates and estimates Federal Way at over 100,000, then that would be an ineligible use.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Do I have a motion?
I have a cold, so.
Okay. I move to forward the proposed resolution to the October 15th, 2019 consent agenda for approval.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Now we have the item I, we have the ordinance, the encouraging investments in affordable housing and supportive housing through sales tax in accordance with HB 1406.
And I will not repeat the presentation, if that's okay, but I would be happy to address any questions that you have pertaining to the ordinance.
No questions. Do I have a motion?
I'd be happy to read a motion. I move to forward the proposed ordinance to the first reading on October 15th, 2019.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thanks, Sarah, for all your work on this.
Thank you.
And with that, we don't have anything else under emerging issues, so unless there's anything else for the good of the order, we will adjourn. And the next meeting is Tuesday, November 12th, 2019, here back in City Council chambers. Thank you.
All right.